once they've hired people, they don't provide them with regular training. And coming from France, where actually employers are by law obliged to dedicate a percentage of your yearly turnover to train their employees, I found that very weird, that companies do not train people. How the offices are organized also plays a role. So underlying this, we have to remember that most of software development is about human beings and not about machines. There's issues of time. You know, we want to be able to do this in a sustainable fashion. There's issues of communication. You know, as you grow in a team, the number of possible communication grows with the square of the number, so you need to find ways to make communication efficient. There's a need to have a common language, and I'm not only speaking about language like English and Russian, anything like that, but people need to be have a common culture of software development so that they can really have a rich exchange and not get into kind of problems. So let's move on that coordination, the relationship between individuals. There is some interesting studies that are being done about coordination. If you have two individuals, and these individuals need something from this individual. So this individual, let's call it Mr. A, builds up a mental image of what he needs to do, what he needs to obtain from B. Part of that mental image is the perception that B share something in common. So let's say the thing that I want is a U. I imagine that B understands what a U is. So I'm going to request this from this person. Now this person has another mental image of what it is that that other person asks. But there's some slight discrepancies or some big discrepancies. So after a while, this person will provide to that person what he thinks is being provided. Now, there is a difference between this and this. There is a delta. And this person at the receiving end will compare what arrived with what mental image he or she had about what he requested. And then something happens or does not happen. This person will sort of say, oh, well, that person is not competent, or that person doesn't understand me, or I better do it myself. So that person may not say anything. Or on the opposite, that person may feedback and rephrase better the request to that person so that the difference of perception, the difference of mental models start to reduce. And at the next attempt, what is passed back will be more conformant to what that person expected. Now, I'm not saying that this person is right. Maybe that person has the right model. But if there is no feedback loop like that, they will never improve their coordination. And you see this little pattern at various levels of granularity. It may be between two companies that speak to each other, negotiating a contract. It may be between two teams that speak occasionally, once every other day. It can be between you and me just over a morning. You know, you ask me something and I come back and I give you something slightly differently. Is it because we have different mental image of that thing, or is it because I'm incompetent? So there's all kind of attitude that people can have here and here. For instance, this person may say, I did not understand what he asked, but I did my best. But because this person is high in the hierarchy, or because this person is in a distant country, or because this person is the customer, I didn't ask for clarification, I just tried to do my best to provide something. This person may also be very judgmental in terms of, well, this person here is not competent or is lazy, or why didn't he ask for clarification? So I may not say anything. If you have this disconnects several times, the gap will increase. There will be building of mistrust between the two persons. On the opposite, if the delta is not too big, and if there is some feedback, if there is some reinforcement, like, oh, thank you very much, that was very good what you gave me. Oh, that was good, but I'm missing this detail. Or, I'm really sorry, but you didn't quite understand me. Can we speak a little bit and I could explain better? Then the level of trust will increase between the two people. So there's all kind of things that are at play when we do coordination between individuals or small teams or group of people. There are language issues, there's this notion of shared mental model, because we use words, but the words represent some reality. Now sometimes we can disambiguate things. If rather than relying on a shared mental model, I can point to the definition in a written process as to what U is, that person could have said, I want a U as defined in the rational unified process, and that person would have gone and checked that. So, unfortunately, sometimes written evidence will help better coordination by reducing the time it takes for the two people to have a shared mental model. So what works well when we have a team of collocated people is that they build shared mental model. And therefore coordination is very easy and requires very little adjustment because we have, all of us share a common mental model of what is expected. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I can give you a little write-up because I've been working with them. Precisely, the co-founder of Agile Vancouver is working with me on trying to describe why things work better in Agile teams based on a formal model of coordination and shared mental model. So.
It looks very. It looks like Alistair Corbin article about sharing of software engineering as sharing theory.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
There's a lot of things. Actually, Steve knows very well Alistair, and Alistair did a PhD dissertation, so that gives the idea to Steve to do also a PhD dissertation. Small world again, you know. Yeah. Everything is connected there.
Because a lot of common things here.
So there is this notion of relation between individuals. There's this naive view of a process that we developed in the 70s, and some of the effects are still there, that we could describe the production of software. It's enough to describe the process in sufficient details with input, process, output, and decompose input, process, output, and just allocate tasks to people, and people would just pass information, transform information, and pass it to each other. And that never worked. You know, a group of people is not like a production machine that produces and bottles beer. You can describe, you know, the production of beer and the bottling and the putting in cases and going to the truck with input-output process. But the production of software doesn't work, even when you take into account some cycles. And a lot of the push into process and more detailed process and describe very precisely the inputs and the output artifact and what needs to be done in the recipe come from the wrong assumption that we can, or the wrong paradigm that we can represent a group of people as some kind of machine to develop software. There were even, you know, I still remember articles in the 80s about software factory and that kind of term that tend to sort of give you the impression that it's just because we were not good enough at describing very precisely all the tasks that we were not successful at developing software. So software projects are not factories, banks, or hospitals. We cannot describe just a simple process of and going stage by stage through a process. First, we manipulate not things, but high amount of information, and a large amount of this information is not written. Even in organizations that have very heavy paper-driven process, there's still a large amount of information that's not written anywhere. The second thing is that there is a large amount of uncertainty, unknown, and risk. It's a creative idea, a creative process. So we cannot have the assembly line style of software production. I've looked at some old books. I have an old book of software engineering from 1970. Actually, it's the first book that has software engineering on the cover. And there is underlying there the idea that we could have some kind of assembly line, you know, where people would pass chunks to other people who would do their part. It's really funny, that thing. Anyhow, how are software team organized? There's different type of organization. Functional, we found in organizations that have very few project metrics and projectize. And it's more subtle than that, but okay, I'll be a bit caricatural. Functional organization looks like this. For a different type of function in an organization, you have people. When you want to create a project, you have to pick people from different functions. So for instance, this should be the people who do analysis, and these are the people who do design, and these are the people who do the coding, and things like that. So to have a project, you need to have a little bit of both. Most of the coordination has to go to the functional manager. So the passing of information between these people is, these people do their job, they tell their boss they're done, their boss passes it to the next guy who shove it down. When there is something that we don't understand, can those people speak directly to them, or do they have to go all around? Doesn't work too well for doing a project. By the way, this mimics very well the waterfall. There were organizations in the 70s and 80s that were like that. You know, we do the design. When the design is done and reviewed and approved, we shove it over the wall to the other guys, and they're going to do the coding. And the coders, when they had written all the code, would shove it over the wall to the people who would do integration and testing. Functional organization as badly used. Okay, so the analyst in an organization, the designers in another one, the coders in another one, the testers in another one. It matches the step of the waterfall. I just said that. There is no real sense of mission or project. People, since they have a limited view of their role, are not really committed to the delivery of a product. The only one that seems to be committed are the last one in the pipe, the people who produce the last step. So it's not very suitable for software project. The other organization is the project organization. That is, there are projects, each project has a manager, and there is staff that reports to that project manager. And the project manager will acquire, you know, from HR or from other defunct project the appropriate staff, but they only report to that project manager. So this worked well. It's okay for small organizations with few projects, but as you start having a lot of projects, there are some inefficiencies. It may not be flexible enough in managing people's time, because each project manager has a sense of ownership. Those are my people. You know, I want them to work for my project, not do time sharing across multiple projects. There is even sometimes a sense of competition between projects. There's imbalance in workload. Some projects may have more staff than they actually need, but are reluctant to relinquish staff even temporarily to another project. And as the organization grows, if you start having large number of projects like that, there is a little bit of reinventing the wheel. things like training people with new technology, sharing code design, helping each other with architectural reviews and things like that is not done because two things are like silos. So larger organizations have come up to some kind of a compromise approach where you have a matrix organization. There's all the people from the same specialty belong to a group and they have some kind of a functional manager. And from their functional manager they will get things like training, tool support, support that is relative to their trade, if I may say so. And projects are organized by doing a cut. So there is, among the various functional areas, there is project management. So when I need to create a new project as the CEO, I appoint a project manager and I find staff from the various things. So when we look at one person here, that person has actually two bosses, one functional manager and one project manager. So you're on loan for a duration of time to a certain project. And the fact that you have two bosses is actually pretty good. So I worked at Alcatel in an organization like that, where we had, hardware designers dealing with the mechanical part of the switch, people doing VSI design, people doing more electrical stuff like power supplies, and people doing boards, and people doing software. So I was in a vertical line like that, and there was a software engineering manager, and the software engineering manager was providing the software people with the appropriate training and process. We had a guidebook on how to develop software, we had tools, we had computers and things like that. But I belonged for several months or several years to a project. So I was on the Alcatel 2600. So there was a project manager for the Alcatel 2600, and I was one of the software guys there. So that seems to balance a little bit the drawback and inconvenience of the other organizations. Many large organizations that develop a little bit more than software, but also develop systems, are organized like that. So what this allows to do, balance workload between projects. You can use peer outside of the project for reviews. Let me give you an example here. I'm a software guy here, and I reach a point where I need some help. I would go to the software manager and try to find some help with the right competence in software to help with that project. Rotate staff to avoid concentration of knowledge of a few indispensable people. Allow to have people move from one project to another. And assess people's performance more objectively. When you have a project with people from various specialty, it's hard to compare their performance. I was sitting there in a project with some very talented VLSI designers, but VLSI designers, they do totally different thing than what I was doing. So I would more be compared across my peer, across all people doing software design than across a given project. There's other forms of organization that people do, SWAT teams, or group of people that are very generalist, collocated, highly motivated, relatively short-term goals. That sounds like your average XPT. Well, probably not by accident. So what we've seen over the last 12 years in the software world, that the people are less specialized. They are more able to do a broader range of activity. Actually, sometimes from analysis down to testing and integration. Also, the kind of tools that we're using has helped to do that. The same Harlan Mills, who created Clean Room, had a very interesting concept many years ago of chief programmer team. And some of these ideas are coming back, having a few very talented people, senior people who have helpers around them and younger people that they mentor. But try to get the best out of your very talented people by making sure that you don't distract them with all kind of administrative work and other distractions. Inside the project, I already said this morning, organize around the architecture and not the way around. Do not organize the project too functionally when it's a large project by putting all the people that do GUI at one end of the building and all the people who are testing at another end of the building. It will die by lack of communication. People need really to be together and see each other and be in each other's face. Again, if you can collocate, that's good. And if a project can have a dedicated space where they can use the walls and have impromptu meetings and things like that, that's a very, very useful thing, to have a dedicated project war room. I don't know if you have that. I haven't seen much that in the building, but I haven't walked in the upper floor. So that's a very, very neat thing to have, that each project has a room, maybe like this one, where they can barge in and have some impromptu meetings. There should be whiteboard in all the walls so that they can leave some designs, and somewhere there's a digital camera that you can use to capture it, and you can play games with cards and tags and post-it notes. And, at Alcatel, many, many years ago, I had a room like that in a project where I was the technical lead. And curiously, I've seen that just in a company in Vancouver. People have cubicles or offices, but most of the work, they have a very big room, and they have rows of computers, and they have boards on wheels, actually, on which they can tack cards. So people can alternate between being in that common space, which has no walls, no dividers, but where people can actually speak to each other, look at some code, do some pair programming and things like that. But they can retreat in their own cubicle and be able to think and do some work without hearing too much of the noise of the others, or maybe they have a headset to isolate themselves. And I had curiously exactly the same organization for that project some 15, almost 20 years ago.
Can I ask you a question? Do you see some good environment for pair programming? Probably some examples or.
I'm not sure I'm following you.
I'm speaking about pair programming, when two people work. Do you know some
an environment
good
keys? A programming environment?
No. How to organize furniture, rooms, and so on?
Well, what I've seen at Custom House just two weeks ago, they've organized sort of 6 stations. So how is it? In the middle of that room that I was describing, they have 6 desks. Each desk there's 2 chairs like this. There's 2 screens. There's 1 keyboard or 2 keyboards, I think. Each one has two flat screens, sort of 19 or 21-inch screen, and like this. But this is not those people offices. It's only used for pair programming. These people happen to have also a private space somewhere. Right? So.
Just for a couple hours per day.
It's just for pair programming. All the programming is done here. So they have this sort of island in the middle of that big room with 6 sort of
But if it doesn't increase the support, of course, we need to buy more differential.
He's asking me for what I think is an ideal environment.
Don't you think it's a waste? Having those 6 desks and people only use them for 2 hours a day.
Oh, but there's more than 12 people in the team.
So
There's actually a little bit of competition. You have to reserve it.
do they like it?
There's about 40 people in that group. I think.
Do they like to compete for those places? To have
I think that I mentioned the thing well enough. The problem is that if you start using each other's offices to do that, it's also a little bit more complicated because each office, each cubicle is a little bit small, it's not very comfortable. There's not necessarily two keyboard and 2 mouse attached to one computer. Well, there's some trade-offs. Here, there's nothing else than just those computers and screens. But I agree with you that there's other computers that work.
And have you seen some environment for distributed programming? I'm in Moscow, my body
I've seen some, but mostly at the research level. I've even seen an environment, a very, very interesting environment, to manipulate cards, virtual cards. And it's a big table about maybe like 4 2 tables, and actually there's projectors on the top, and there are sensors, and you manipulate things with your finger. And you can move cards, and you can take some kind of pen and scribble with it, and the other side sees exactly the same thing and can also interact with the card. So you can reorganize them, but there is no card, it's just an image on some screen. It's
Wow.
pretty neat. You may know the guy who's behind that. His name is Frank Barber. Frank Barber. Even that name is known in the agile world.
It's good for planning station, for example, right?
Yeah. So the planning, they try to do it like that in a distributed fashion with this kind of. The hardware is not that complicated, but the software behind is difficult. They had to modify the way the operating system was working. Especially because you want to be able to move through things and rotate them. And okay, so moving on. On larger system, you may need to have teams of teams and not necessarily co-located. So what do I mean by a team? Something between 2 and 12 people. Beyond that, you might still call it a team, but some of the dynamics starts to fall apart. If you have 17 people in the team, it's probably better to try to organize it in 2 or 3 smaller teams. They share a common culture and language. So in order to achieve the point where they share a common culture and language, you need to dedicate some effort for them to build that common culture and language. They have a common goal, something that does not always happen, mutual respect, and they hold themselves accountable. If you have teams where people don't trust the other people to do the right thing, or see them as some kind of competitors or annoyance, it's not going to work very well. Very often they have complementarities. I mean, they're not identical people, they have different strengths, and understand what are the strengths of the other and exploit the strengths of the other. When you work in a team, and it's a team of peers, there is these issues that we were vaguely brushing just before lunch. You asked me who identifies tasks, and who distributes them, who manages the backlog for the team. It's nice to have a bunch of peers, but you don't always reach consensus. So in my opinion, each team has a designated person who ultimately is held accountable for the team. But doesn't mean that because that person is held accountable that that person makes all the decisions and distributes the work. But if things get tough and if we don't get a consensus, that person has to sort of stand up and be more authoritative. Use fewer and better people. Well, it's easier said than done, but again and again, there's no point in adding more people that are not qualified to a team. It doesn't help. It drags the rest of the team down if you bring unqualified people to a team. I'm willing to stand up to HR and say, sorry, keep them. I don't need this kind of people in my team. But you ask for more staff and you're always complaining that. I says, yes, but it's not any staff. Having a bunch of total beginners on that team is just going to drag us down. I'd rather continue with less people. Help people get the most out of themselves, well, as a team leader. There's issues of personalities. There are certain people who just cannot work together. It happens once in a while, and the best is just to remove them from the team. There's no trying to work around forever and get daily into some nasty situation with somebody that's always behaved in a strange fashion, defensively or aggressively with the rest of the team. There's no point. Remove them.
What is the principle?
Hmm?
What is Peter?
Who is a Peter?
Well, it's a gentleman whose last name was Peter. The Peter principle is it's a long parenthesis, so this is why I wanted to skip that. It's not indispensable. Now, in an organization, people who do good at a certain level are promoted to the next level, and they might still do good at the next level, and they're promoted again until they reach the level at which they are incompetent. In which case, they start doing a bad job, and they're never promoted again, and they stick there forever. Okay? Somebody discovered that in the 70s and wrote a little book about it with all kind of examples and things like that. There is another thing that is a little bit like that, but in reverse. Some people become so competent and accumulate so much knowledge that they become indispensable. And this is a risk, because if they leave the team, basically the team just collapses, because they've accumulated too much of the expertise, either in the domain, or in the code, or in the design, or in the communication with the customer, or with the team in Kiev, or Omsk. And it's a little bit the reverse of the Peter principle. It's not that they're promoted to a point of incompetence, but they've become sort of too competent in some area, and this leads to a certain level of risk. So one of the things that a team leader has to make sure of is that the knowledge is sufficiently spread. As I used to say, it sounds a little bit nasty, but sometimes I close my eye and I say, what happens if he gets run over by a truck? Do we survive or not? What happens if he gets do we survive or not? What happens if he gets What happens if all three of them fall from a cliff? Well, okay, so you have to, I know it's not a nice thing to think about, and it's not necessarily running over by a truck, it's getting a good opportunity somewhere else, or coming to see me and say, my wife has a fantastic offer in Seattle and we're moving there,
What will you do if you have some talented developer who does a lot of work in the project, but it's a risk, killer. What would you do?
Spread the work, ask that person to do pair programming, or rotate the responsibility to another subsystem, and so that that person deploys tenant on something else and somebody else works on the same modules.
Okay,
Rotate-
it will decrease
rotate.
productivity in any case.
Yes, but there's always this balance between risk and if losing that person is low risk and you think that you can recover, yeah, then favor productivity. But if you are a little bit cautious, I would advise that tiny loss of productivity might be good. And after all, that person may discover all kind of other useful things in that other part of the code. Things that kill teams are excessive bureaucracy, time fragmentation. If people cannot dedicate long periods of time to completing tasks, if you break time, if they have to swap between multiple activities, like I see some of you doing while doing this training, just always going to another meeting or another phone call. Sometimes time fragmentation becomes so acute that people are becoming unproductive. Yes, they're present for a meeting there, and yes, they go to the daily stand-up, and yes, they jump on a phone call, and yes, they go to fix that thing, and then they go to their previous project because some other guys told them to help fix a bug, and then they come back, and finally they have so many things that they start dropping things on the floor. There are things that they forgot to do, and or they're not doing completely. So you have to monitor a little bit time fragmentation and make sure that people can have enough chunks of time allocated to doing only one thing so that they can complete it, rather than constantly multitask. Same thing like in an operating system. If an operating system has too many things, the word in English I think is thrashing, where the operating system spends its time just changing, rescheduling other tasks, but each task has not enough CPU time available.
Excuse me, what
Yeah.
can project manager do with time fragmentation? Because it's a project manager's job.
What can you do with it? Well, I would say monitor what's going on in your project, go around, see what people do, ask them how they spend their time, and try to protect them from external interrupts.
I mean,
Try not to be
managers
yourself the
themselves.
source of interrupt.
I mean, project managers themselves, because their job is
Oh,
always
yeah, well,
very
if
fragmented.
they themselves are unaware of that, if they're unaware that there's a source of time fragmentation, then, you know, tell them. I don't know. That, as a manager, I was aware of that, and I'm trying to make sure that actually I try to protect people from being interrupted all the time. Was it with you that we had this discussion about meeting? Or was it on Monday? I don't know. We had a discussion with some people about meeting. I'm against big meeting. I don't think we should have meeting about this and meeting about that. When people need to have some exchange and coordination, then 2 or 3 people meet, just for the duration of that thing. But big meetings that are scheduled regularly on some topic tend to increase that time fragmentation. Sometimes with no benefit or no big benefit from some of the people who are in the meeting, and some project manager organize a lot of meeting where it's only to their benefit, but there's extremely little benefit to the 16 people they have interrupted for an hour.
Let me ask you a question about your experience. What is the best length of the ATOM task for developer? I mean, 1 day, half a day, to avoid this additional efforts for switching to content, as you explained.
I don't know. It depends also a little bit on the people and the type of task. It's between 3 hours and 3 days. But it varies. It varies depending on the individual, on the type of problem. It's for a lot of people, it's useful to have two things that they drive in their life, so that they can drive one, and when they run out of steam, they can drive the other one until they run out of steam or ideas or whatever, or they're blocked by something. Then they can resume the other one. So it's, for most people, and again, there's personalities, and for most people, it's good to give them two things that they can run more or less in parallel. So you run one until you're blocked or tired, or you're missing some information, you're waiting for an answer from somebody. Then you run the other one until you're blocked, and so on. Because if people have only one thing to do, then they run one thing, and they're blocked, or they run out of ideas, or they get tired, and then what? Then they check email, browse the web, go and bug somebody, and have a chat, and refill their mug. But if you have two things that you can move one and then the other, you're overall a little bit more productive. And now, maybe it's three for some people, I don't know. But if you have two, it's already a good start. For some people, you may have three because they're more blocked by missing information from other people. That's different from being interrupted, because you may be at the peak of the moment where you're creative and you want to finish this line of thought and you want to test it now, and I have to go to a meeting, and 1 hour later I come back, and it takes quite some time to be again in the mood, in the flow. If you know the book by Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, Flow, Don't know this book?
Could you repeat?
Oh, it's an awful Czech name, I think. It's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and the name of the book is Flow.
Well, it's psychologist. The book.
Yeah, it's a book on psychology. I think it's.
I think the name of the book is enough for us.
Something like that. Csikszentmihalyi.
Looks like Italian. Yeah.
No,
Italian.
no, I think it's Hungarian.
Hungarian.
Hungarian. Yeah, don't create artificial deadlines that are meaningless, that are just there to be a date on the calendar. Deadlines should be related to really a delivery or somebody else needing the outcome of what you do. But creating totally arbitrary deadline, as I see some nasty, almost I would say nasty manager do, just in order to apply pressure on people, serves no purpose. You're just stressing people for nothing. If actually you're pushed to deliver something by Thursday at 2 o'clock, but nobody needs that thing before the following Thursday, what was the point in, and you're late, and don't create phony deadlines. Most companies build their bureaucratic rules to manage the small percentage of wrong people on the bus, which in turn drive away the right people on the bus, which then increases the need for more bureaucracy to compensate for incompetence and lack of discipline, which then further drives the right people away, and so forth. And I read that a few years ago, and I say, yep, I've been there, done that. Actually, this was a little bit the case that made me leave Alcatel telephony. Suddenly we were merging with larger companies, there were bureaucratic rules and things like that. Our life started to be miserable, and several of us left.
It is not.
And guess what? In 2003, I did again the same thing. When I arrived at IBM after 6 months, there was so much bureaucracy that I left. Now, am I the good guy who left? I don't know, but.
It seems it's not only about software development. It's
Yeah,
about life.
this is very general, but it's true that sometimes adding some bureaucracy to compensate to the fact that people are not super competent, you're actually not really helping, because you're discouraging the people who are actually effective and competent.
Yeah.
So don't burden your competent people with a lot of bureaucratic things which is only there to make sure that the incompetent people are doing the right thing. So here, agile practices are a lot about these issues of people. And I was very glad to sort of see the agile movement as a sort of counterbalance to this software factory, you know, very detailed process, input process, output, and things like that, because then the human people start dealing things. So things like daily scrum, you know, very rapid way of, you know, knowing where we stand and who's doing what. Looking at the whole team, having a sustainable pace, speaking about direct communication, not everything through document. Customer on-site and pair programming is an example of direct communication. And use walls, post-it notes, board with cards, all this kind of thing, which I haven't seen in this building, so I'd be interested to know if you have some. So, project manager, try to align work interest with work assignment. Yeah, easy to say to do, but in order to do that, you need to know the people who work for you. What are they good at? What are they competent at? What are they interested in doing? And the work interest can evolve by training. So, oh, you're not interested in doing that kind of thing, but if you had the right training, maybe you'll become more interested in that kind of thing. So maybe you don't like to do this kind of thing because you're not too good at OO and UML, but after having been educated in that, you'll come back from the training and say, wow, this was great. I'd like to do some more of this. The stupid cheerleading and lying to people that I've seen mostly in North America. In France, people are very, very direct with each other on the workplace. But in North America, I see a lot of, oh, you're so great, and when actually you think exactly the opposite. You're a total asshole, and I'd like to get rid of you. But no, we have to sort of, you know, have this. Bugs me a lot.
You don't share this culture, right?
No. Monetary rewards always, it works, but you cannot also have just this, you know. And things are not always with a value in rubles. So yeah, you need to show people that you appreciate them when you appreciate them for when they do good thing, rather than lie to them about, you know, hey, provide thinking-oriented office space. I had some big disagreement with that at Krutchen Software with one of our VP who likes the open space things and cubicles and things like that. It's not the best for software development. It's the best for saving costs. Yes, but it's not the best for when you have to do some thinking. Okay, let's not go into that. There's lots of money around it. So the project manager is at the service of its team and not the opposite. Okay. So the team is my customer as a project manager. So I'm trying to think, what can I do to make their life better? You know, more resources, more this, less interrupts, more of that, less of that, protect them from disruption. They have a problem, help them solve the problem, find the right people from outside to help them solve the problem. So there's some coaching and mentoring. I see some people need, you know, more explanation. I take them apart, we discuss the thing. I don't say, oh, you're just, you know, no good, you know, you're not doing things. No, maybe it requires, you know, some coaching and mentoring. Setting goals and priorities, resolving problems and conflicts. It's not the other way around. Now, the project manager might delegate some problems to some people to solve because you're much more competent than me to resolve this technical issue, so I'm dumping the thing on you. But in the end, I'm responsible for making sure that the problem is removed so that you can make some progress. The fact that I ask him to help It's just because I delegate things to people that are more competent than me, or maybe have a few more cycles than me. Providing resources, we know that career development training, this is looking a little bit beyond simply this project. Sometimes this is taken care of by another part of the organization, but the project manager is the relay. I'm the relay between HR and my team in terms of training and career opportunities and things like that, including finding better position for my own team members. It may be the case that, yeah, that guy, is very valuable in my team, but it might be more valuable somewhere else, and it would be a good career move for him to, I don't know, move to Seattle for 8 months or something like that. Technical guidance wherever possible. After all, the project manager may be a techie himself or herself that still have some technical competence and can actually help with some deep technical issue. Let's skip that part. That was mostly intended for people who never heard about people management. So, this is the kind of thing that you'd better get from your HR people. How do you do for hiring, performance appraisal? I heard you use term like 360 degrees. That's a little bit what I mean. The kind of things that you have to be ready for when you're a software project manager, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, is firing people, firing them from the team or firing them from the company, or firing many of them at the same time, which is not very pleasant, which happened to me only twice in my life. No, 3 times.
From what side?
Huh?
From what side?
From what
You were
side?
fired or you fired?
Actually, no, I had to lay off some people in 91 at Rational Software. 37 people, but only 4 were in my team. And in 2001, 3 people from my team, for economic reason, who were just very short, not because they were incompetent. And in 2003, everybody, including me. No, everybody except one. Only one stayed with IBM, which means 18 people.
What is your words in this case? What is your first words?
Okay, let's discuss that over beer later. It's especially when they're very good people and you hide them all yourself and you work for several years together. It's not an agreeable thing to do. By the way, I will only say this: do not improvise these kind of things. Like get support from HR specialists. It's not something that you want to say, I'm handling this all by myself. You might do the wrong kind of thing. So let's skip this kind of thing. You probably know that we have different personalities. By the way, this was, we had this beginning of a discussion. You asked me, take it with a grain of salt. This is not, super deep science, but it seems to have some value. The Myers-Briggs indicator has sort of 4 main dimensions to classify personality. One dimension is extroversion, introversion. Guess what? We software people, we are mostly introvert. By a vast majority. There's only a few of us that are extrovert. There's the sensing, intuition. This is how do we gather information. It's a little bit mixed in software. There's the thinking feeling. How do we draw conclusion? How do we make judgment? How do we weigh human factors, social aspect, and so on. That's another dimension. Then judging, perceiving. How do we collect data and make judgment to stay on path and so on. So when you combine two things, you end up with 16 types. So for instance, INTJ is an introvert, intuitive thinking, judging. Most software folks are introvert, about 75%, sorry, I said 85. ISTJ is the dominant, so a quarter of the people. Architects or designers are either INTP or INTJs. So how can you use that? Some companies, several large US companies, and I think Boeing is one of them, is using this to try to assess whether people are in the right job. But what I found it useful is not to hire people or find if they're in the right job. What I found it is when a team is created, to try to understand among each other why we behave differently. You know, why some of us are more want to read things and don't want to discuss things. Some people are more likely to want to discuss things. Some people love to go around and speak to everybody. Some people are extremely quiet. So knowing about the type classification and knowing what are the type of the members of the team help people be more accepting of the difference between themselves and other people. So in that respect, I found it a little bit helpful. As a project manager, I could also adapt my own style of communication, knowing what was the personality type of the various team members.
So, did you use personally some work? I need to find some architects. That's my, it means that he needs to have some technical skills and he is in team.
Yeah, but again, as I said, I never use that to hire people.
Never.
Because, well, it's very complicated. There are some ethical issues in North America about whether you have the right to ask people to pass certain tests. I never used it to hire people. But when I was in a team where we all would know what the personality type, then it's useful to discuss it to understand why we behave differently.
Did it help?
Yeah. In that second aspect, it really helped.
What kind of results, conclusions can you get from this stuff? Can you give an example? Like, it can, for example, tend to firing all people or what else?
No, it's the way people collect information, for instance. There's different style. Some people are very quick to make choices or decisions, even if it's to say, oh, I changed my mind now. Some people will think about it much longer. And it's not like one is better than the other. It's not the quick one that always has an opinion about everything that's better than the other one. I think you need a little bit of both, and you need to understand this person always has an opinion and always makes a choice. I know to wait. I'm not jumping on that thing because I know that he or she is like that, and in 2 days after receiving more information will change his mind. Whereas this other one who doesn't say anything for several days but then say something, I know that this has been thought of very, very carefully and I should pay maybe more attention. So this kind of thing is useful. There's other kinds of tests of the same kind. We'll have to stop soon, as I told you, the ladies asked me to stop at 5. But let's look a little bit about culture, because in an outsourcing environment, that's something interesting. When we start dealing with other people, there's different stages. The first stage is an ethnocentric stage, where we judge other people relative to our own culture. And then, after a while, we realize that no culture is the dominant culture, so we try to relativize things. And we're becoming more accepting of the differences. And a lot of people stay in that stage forever. They are unable to get to the ethno-relativist stage. And what do I mean by culture? Culture is a very complex thing that is a mixture of things like the system of values that you've been educated on, that has been imprinted by the dominant religion in the country, the laws, your parents, the schooling system from kindergarten up to high school. There's all kind of factors. Basically, it's how do you judge yourself relative to the world, relative to your peers, to other human beings, and things like that. So there's visible part of culture. You know, when you see arts and literature and language and food and dress and games and things like that, that's very visible. But what is very interesting for us is the hidden part, which is actually the dominant part. Values, privacy, role in society, education, behavior, motivation, fears, rituals, and things like that. And that's where there is a lot of things that start to play in software. So there are cultural factors, and people have studied cultural factors, you know, these differences between culture. And the ones that I found have some impact in global software development are listed here. One is this notion of low context, high context. High context, there is a lot of unspoken meanings. There is a lot of things unsaid. Whereas low context, the word just mean what they mean. Therefore, to have some meanings, I have to have a lot of words. So, in high context society, and Japan is one, China is one, France is one, we may say something, but a lot of meaning is implicit and is coming from surrounding things, knowing the other people, knowing the context, and that kind of thing. Whereas in low context society, they want to be very explicit. And the US is a very low context society. I'm still laughing at the amount of details in the contract that I'm signing with Luxoft, which has 4 pages of blah blah. Well, a French person, I would say, I come, I deliver the training, I keep copyright on my slide, please don't put this thing on the web. That's it. The rest is assumed. But in a US contract, it has to be detailed on 4 pages of fine, 0.9 text. That's the difference between high context and low context. So guess what? We have a global software project. There are high context people on one hand and low context people on the other hand. The low context people would want everything detailed and in writing. The high context people say, we just need a handshake. Yes, I heard you about the requirement. We had this meeting, I took notes. Why do you want me to ask, why do you ask me now to detail everything? We're losing our time. We're already working on that stuff. So that's the kind, I'm caricaturing a little bit for effect, but that's the kind of misunderstanding that happens. Now things get a little bit more complicated because we understand that the other party is low context. So I have Japanese people. They want to have a contract with me about one of their employees coming to Vancouver to work for 9 months in my team. So they think, Rational Software, this is a US company. We need to get some advice on how to do a contract that is very detailed and acceptable by the US people. So the Japanese people, for whom my word was enough and their word was enough for me, they come up with a contract that tries to outdo the US lawyers from Rational. So sometimes it gets very convoluted because you're interpreting what the other party would expect and try to play their game and even play more than what they would have done. Another example, we don't hold, all cultures around the world don't have the same notion of time. We don't feel time flowing the same way. I know this looks weird, but a lot of cultures are monochronic. That is, there is one flow of time and we're doing one thing at a time, and we partition our time in slots, and we don't try to intermingle various things. And that's the monochronic people. US, Scandinavia, they're very much like that. When I look at Outlook, I always smile because it's very, very monochronic. The time is organized in slots of 15 minutes. But people from the Middle East or people from the south of France, we have a very, very soft notion of time. Things do not have to start at a boundary of time. They do not have to finish at a boundary of time. We can start something and interrupt and do something else. And And, you know, I don't think that French people are much more ineffective than other people in the business. But there is a level of mistrust that happens. So if you have American people working with French people or people from Algeria, the French people, we say, oh, let's meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The American people, they are there at 2 to 10, and at 5 past 10, they say, but we're the only one. The French people start gathering, and we cannot start the meeting immediately. We have to schmooze and speak about some other thing. It's impolite to get down to business. And then, you know, we reach close to 11, and then the American people are nervous. You know, 11 is arriving, because a meeting, you know, it's 1 hour or 2 hours, but it's not vague, you know, it's not 53 minutes or 100 minutes. So we need to conclude, but the French people are not in a rush to conclude. Actually, they interrupt, and they go and do something else, and then they come back, and then they go for lunch. And, but things happen in the end. So you have this mistrust. The American people, oh, these people, they are unreliable, and they're never on time, and they do all kind of other things. They're so unprofessional. And the French people, these Americans, they're sort of anal retentive, you know, they're there looking at their watch all the time. So there's a lot of mistrust that build up. Again, I'm caricaturing for effect. You know, I know it's not that black and white. But I had to educate. I was the French guy in the rational team for several years. I was the only French guy living in France. I had to educate my American colleagues about this. They were always not understanding. How is it that we cannot work with you Italians and French and Spanish? And
how did you personally feel in rational being one French guy?
Well, first, it was not the first time that I was working with Americans. I had spent 2 years in New York at New York University, so I got a little bit of a clue. And the second thing, I'm a bit of a chameleon. There are people who are able to adjust to their environment more easily than others, because I've traveled a lot. I lived in 6 or 7 countries in the world. So I didn't have a problem with that. But, so there are other things that are important, and we'll leave it at that. A gentleman called Hofstede has done a huge study on cultural factors, and he found 5 that are very significant. One is power distance. Power distance, another simple word is hierarchy. Our feeling of hierarchy. Some societies are always very naturally organizing themselves in hierarchy. You put the senior people, the one that look older, the one that have a tie and a 3-piece suit, and then the younger one. And people locate themselves relative to that hierarchy. And they do that almost without thinking about it. Some societies are very flat. And as an example, the Japanese society is extremely hierarchical. The French society, curiously, is also very hierarchical, even in the workplace, even if we don't wear a tie. But in the US, it's relatively flat. In Scandinavia, it's also relatively flat. So this plays some interesting role when people are temporarily relocated. Or, for instance, the Thai people have a very, very hard time locating themselves where they are relative to the other party. There's some interesting thing there. Collectivism versus individualism is a little bit what we discussed at lunchtime. The Indian society is a collectivist society. Northern Europe and North America are very individualistic. People are there for themselves first, and then their project, then their company, then society. Whereas in India, you're part of a group. You don't try to stand up and compete. Again, I'm caricaturing. There's always individuals that are different or adopt another system of value. So this also is visible in software project and the way people behave. And You have a lot of, you have visible personalities when you deal with individualist things. People want to be known for themselves with a name. They don't present themselves. I'm the person from Team XYZ. They say, I'm Joe Blow, and I work for Team XYZ. Whereas in a collectivist things, you don't even, your name is unimportant. You're there because you're a member of a team. This has nothing to do with gender. There are societies that are more feminine, more caring for their members than others. Sweden, for instance, France. People expect the state to do a lot of things for you. I may suspect that Russia is also a little bit like that. At the other extreme, there are societies where you're in for yourself, you fend for yourself, the US for instance. People don't expect the state to fill in all kind of needs and, medical support and retirements and kindergarten and all that kind of thing. So this is not very visible on the workplace. Uncertainty avoidance. Some society, people are extremely afraid of everything that is uncertain. They don't want to take any risk about anything. The Japanese are a little bit like that. Some, on the opposite, uncertainty is what they thrive upon. That's the entrepreneurship model. Some societies, people are more interested in long-term issues, even at the detriment of the short term. And some other societies, people are always concerned with the short term. For instance, North America, there's very, very short term. People, whereas in other societies, it doesn't really matter what happens in the next 2 months. We are here for the long term. We are employed by this company until retirement. So the decision we make will have an impact in 5 years and 10 years, and not, let me get through that project and anyhow we'll have another job before the end of the year in another company. Again, I'm caricaturing a little bit. So all those things are playable. There's another guy called Fons Trompenaars, another Dutch guy, who did a little bit the same study and came up with some slightly different factors. Specific, diffuse, neutral, emotional, so different classification, but we're running out of time. I'll give you some examples of this. One thing that I found interesting in Trompenaars is the attitude towards title and degrees. When I'm using after working for 17 years with Russian software, I realized that I had different models of business cards. I had business card that just said Philippe Krutchen, used in France, for instance, because in France you don't put your degrees or titles or little letters. But I had Dr. Ingenieur Philippe Krutchen for use in Germany, because there it's important to show that you have degrees and things like that. And in North America, I'm a professional engineer and all kind of things, so I had some commas after my name and some little letters. And the Japanese people at Rational Software, they thought very carefully and very long about what title they should put to me, because this was a very, very delicate choice and it conditioned a lot of things. And so different culture pay different attention to different things. You are what you are because you've achieved great things, or you are where you are in the company because you have a big title and big university degrees. It's very curious. Some culture pay more attention to your university degrees and things like that, and the title that you have in the company, VP of something, you're VP for vice president. And some culture pay much more attention as to what you've done. And it doesn't matter whether you have degrees or at all. So this has an impact on software development in the way we do management, in the way we communicate across, oceans, in the way we drive meetings because of this notion of time, for instance, in the way we allocate tasks. We have to be respectful of hierarchies and things like that when it matters, in the way we elicit requirements from customer, in the way we do negotiations of contracts. Again, the high context, low context things comes into play. I even found some interesting things with the Japanese on how to do bug reporting. But I'll tell you the story some other time. So, Monday morning, phone call between two countries very, very far apart. Mr. A says, we'll need all the features in the CM system by Friday at 9 a.m. so that we can do the final release to send to the lab to build an installer. Yes, is the answer at the other end of the phone. The week passes by and now it's Friday noon and A checks and there's nothing in the CM system. So he takes the phone and calls B and says, but you've not pushed your stuff in the CM system. What's going on there? And the other voice says, yes.
Very common.
So what happens here? Well, here, you know, maybe there's an issue of hierarchy and respect and whatever, face it. This guy says yes, but this yes means you're completely screwed up. We can't do that. I cannot tell you because you think that we are incompetent, but that's not possible at all. But I said yes, and this yes only means I heard you, but it's not a commitment. What did A heard? A heard, yes, he's committed. We will have the thing in the CM system. So what does this yes mean? Again, it's just yes. We haven't pushed the thing in the system. I'm not trying to justify or whatever. So again, this is very caricatural, but I have dozens and dozens of examples of things like that that I've collected over the years, and I have even now 2 grad students who've collected some more. There's lots of communication mishaps. So 2 people discuss and says, oh yeah, I have some new data on the defect that we have on this product. And the other says, oh yes, I know, I've started to address some of them, you know. Yes, how come? Yeah, I read the fax in the fax machine earlier today. But that fax was addressed to me. Yeah, but it was in the fax machine. I don't see what's the problem there. Well, at least you could have told me and canceled this meeting. Oh, I didn't want to cancel the meeting because I wanted to speak about this new candidate that we interviewed. So again, we have people from 2 different cultures. One is a culture which has a lot of impact on privacy, whereas the other one, you know, it's a fact that arrive in the organization. We're one collective things, you know. There's not this notion of individuals. This fax is addressed to me, and therefore nobody should else read it. There is the notion of we had a meeting to discuss precisely the defect, and you didn't cancel the meeting, but you want to discuss something else, so you're not respecting me and my time, and so other little incidents. Let's skip this one. Oh, this one is a good one. So there is this guy. He's a big functional manager in some countries, interviewing some 10 candidates for a software development position. And then there's an 11th candidate. It's his wife's nephew, who has a hard time finding a job because he didn't quite finish his bachelor degree in engineering. So Jay cancels all the remaining interviews and hires him. So, if we assume that J is in a collectivist, polychronic, high-context, hierarchical, feminine society, or J is an individualist, monochronic, low-context, masculine society. So if he's in a collectivist, polychronic, like India, well, he's done the only normal thing that he could do. But if J is, let's say, in the US, well, he'll get fired for doing this. Now, this case, which is a real case, J lives in India, but works for a company headquartered in the US. So speak about a dilemma. So Jay, whom I know very well, is a friend of mine, says, if I didn't hire my wife's nephew, I would be the scum of the earth. I will never be invited to any family event. People would tell me, what? You're the guy who succeeded, who went to the US, had a PhD from University of Illinois, and is now here in Bangalore, driven by his chauffeur to work, and you cannot even take care of your own family? This is absolutely amazing. On another hand, which says, well, this is nepotism. You have to hire people based on their quality, not because they're your wife's nephew. You know, what's worse than that? You know, bribing you with some money? So, what do you think he did actually?
He should not cancel all the interviews, but hires this.
No, he did something much smarter than that.
What?
Yeah?
What?
He didn't cancel the interviews, he continued to interview. But he called all his friends until he found a job for his nephew, his wife's nephew. So, both aspects were secure. But okay, this is just to give you some example as to, I can recommend the book by Trompenaars if you're interested, and the book by Edward Hall. Edward Hall, Beyond Culture. Anyhow, we'll leave it at that for now. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned you would like to do some role plays, like
Actually, some people are waiting for me. Maybe later around 7 when the beer
Сейчас я немного спрошу, а можно написать контент?
Не, можешь не выкладывать, можно.
Let me write.